I'm Chip Bach, and welcome to BluRock. On each episode, we'll discuss what life is like on this big blue rock, where we are all headed, separately and together, what changes we need to make to ourselves, the planet, and towards each other, and just discuss what daily life is like for your fellow crew. And maybe, just maybe, we may also see a commonality that connects all of us. All right, welcome to another episode of BluRock. This is a little bit of a flashback episode. It is World UFO Day again today, July 2nd, 2024. And obviously, we did an episode last year for World UFO Day with Mark Anthony. So we brought Mark back again. Mark, welcome to BluRock.
Thank you,
as usual. We've got the gallery teed up for you, so they're cheering you in.
Thank you.
All right,
thank you very much, everybody.
Shut that off. So, Mark, for those of you who don't know, haven't seen Mark before or watched any of the episodes previously, Mark is a attorney, also known as the psychic lawyer. He's a fourth generation psychic medium who communicates with spirits. He's an Oxford-educated attorney licensed to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. I don't know if you've been talking to the latest Supreme Court, Mark, but we'll talk about that shortly.
That used to be a prestigious
there used to be something.
Credential.
Never mind. We're going to get off track there.
Mark
Mark was named a notable graduate by the Arthur Findlay College of Psychic Science. He is a Spiritual Awakenings International Circle of Honor honoree, and he received the OMMIE Award for Best Psychic Medium. He's also appeared nationwide on TV and radio, including CBS TV's The Doctors, Gaia TV. If you haven't seen any of his episodes, please subscribe to Gaia and go check those out. Gaia TV, for those of you who don't know, is like my Netflix. And the Discovery Channel. He co-hosts the live stream show, The Psychic and the Doc, on the Transformation Network each week. Mark travels to mystical locations in remote corners of the world to examine ancient mysteries and supernatural phenomena. He's a featured speaker at conferences, expos, and universities, which include Brown, Columbia, Harvard, and Yale. Mark is the author of 3 best-selling books. His latest, for those of you on YouTube, The Afterlife Frequency, has won multiple awards, ranked as one of the top books about faith, and was also up for a Pulitzer Prize. His other best-selling books are Never Letting Go and Evidence of Eternity. Again, we'll talk about these before the end of the show. He's also a VIP executive contributor for Best Holistic Life magazine. Please welcome Mark Anthony to the BluRock podcast for this UFO Day. And Mark's sporting his Little Green Men shirt as well in honor of today's broadcast. So thanks, Mark. Welcome to BluRock.
Oh, thank
welcome
you, Chip.
back.
Yeah, I figured since we're doing World UFO Day, I'll wear my alien shirt. But yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating topic, and thank you for mentioning Best Holistic Life magazine, because I write for them, and every month I try to write an article for that month. And this month's article is entitled UFOs, Who is Watching Who? And
Nice.
People can find out about subscribing to Best Holistic and to signing up for my newsletter and getting a reading by visiting my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com, just like my book, Afterlife Frequency. But UFOs are just an amazing topic. And, you know, Chip, we've gone from it was a fringe thing, it was, if you said you saw it, that you're crazy, to within the last 2 years, congressional hearings about it. And there's even a petition going around online for people to petition Congress to pass the UAP, the UFO Disclosure Act, because Congress won't make all the documentation available. And
Dr. Stephen Greer has been at the forefront of this. My understanding is he just dumped a whole bunch of documents. I was hearing this in the last couple of weeks, down onto his website, and I don't have it. I'll put it up when we
well, that's good. Yeah, that's
when we
good.
do the when this podcast drops. I'll include some of that in the information. But yeah, to your point, I mean, there's so much information, so much going on. Mark, you and I are going to talk about this too, because I know you've got a tremendous background because of your dad. Mark's dad worked on the Apollo 13 project. He was also a Navy SEAL. Is that correct?
Yeah, he was a Navy SEAL. Worked with Chuck Yeager. Worked in the Mercury, Gemini, and the Apollo program. And my dad had some amazing insights and experiences with the. I'll start talking a little bit about my dad. He was a young engineer, and the vice president of Reaction Motor came into the room where he was working, and there's all the engineers there, and he said, President Kennedy is going to be making a speech next week that we're going to land a man on the moon. And so all the engineers were like, yeah, and they were like, wow, that's so Flash Gordon. I mean, Star Trek wasn't even around then, so they're all saying Flash Gordon. Right. And then the VP said, and you're the guys who are going to figure out how we're going to do it. So my father, while working on it, he said when they were coming up with designs for the lunar module, which was the actual craft that landed on the moon, he said that we're going to need a secondary system of rockets, which they refer to them as retro rockets.
Right.
He said because the main thrusters are going to be too powerful, and when they're coming in, they're going to need something of a lower power to give them a softer landing. And so a bunch of the engineers were making fun of him. They were calling him Rocket Man and all that. But the lead engineer said to him, he said, well, what's your idea? And so my dad showed them this. All right. Well, Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969. Kennedy, back then, it seemed like NASA was invincible. We could do anything. We were just an amazing society. We still are, but there was something special about that particular generation. And what most people were not aware of is that when the Eagle, the lunar module, was going to land, they overshot their landing spot by almost 20 miles, and in so doing, burned up all of their reserve fuel. Right. So they landed on Tranquility Base, the Sea of Tranquility. Neil Armstrong gets out and says the famous words, one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. And he was with Buzz Aldrin. Long story short, Buzz Aldrin was the engineer, and Neil Armstrong was the pilot. And Buzz found out the ignition switch had broken. And they radioed Houston and told them. And President Nixon was informed, and a speech was prepared about how these heroes are going to die on the moon. And meanwhile, back on the moon, and think about it, Chip, can you think of being more lonely than that? I mean, the first
there's no Radio Shack to replace that switch.
I mean, you are the loneliest people in the solar system.
Yeah.
You're stuck on the moon.
Good God.
And Neil Armstrong said to Buzz Aldrin, he goes, Buzz, can you fix this? And Buzz said, we got one chance, Neil. And he took a big pen and he unscrewed the pen and took the pen, the ink part out of it. It had the clear plastic tube, and he jammed it into the broken switch and pulled it up, and they heard a click, and then the ignition went off.
Come on.
Okay.
This doesn't even sound.
And this only came out about.
How did Bic not run this as their new ad campaign?
Well, this came out about 15 years ago because it was all classified, and Buzz Aldrin was the one who was talking about it. Yeah. So the lunar module was able to get back in the moon's orbit. But meanwhile, the command module, the Apollo 11 module, was orbiting the moon. And because they had overshot their landing spot, they had to recalculate the orbit so that the lunar module and the command module could dock. And back then, they had to use slide rules. They didn't have calculators. They didn't have computers the way we do. And the engineers and the mathematicians figured it out.
Wow.
And I saw Buzz Aldrin say, he said, if it weren't for retro rockets, we never would have got off the moon because we burned up our reserve fuel, so we had to switch to the retro rockets. And it was my father's idea that got them off the moon. And
Wow.
the reason I like to tell this story is because my dad was a very unassuming, a very humble man. I think you actually may have met him once or twice years ago when I was doing public events. He
Yeah.
would come to some of my events, and he's since passed. And he's not in any history books. He's not even a footnote. But he
Yeah.
was one of those people, one of those faceless, nameless people whose talents made these things possible.
Wow. That's
And
amazing.
then, like 2 years later, when Apollo 13, and we're all familiar with Apollo 13, and if for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, see it. It's a great movie. He was one of the guys that helped figure out how to bring it back. And I was
Yeah.
a little kid, and I remember him coming home from work, and he said to my mom, he goes, Jeannie, I got to go back to work. We got to figure out something tonight, or these guys are going to die.
Right.
And I said, well, Dad, on the news, they said everything's okay. And he said, Mark, that's what they're telling us on the people on the news. He says, we got to figure out something now. And figure it out. They did.
Wow. That's amazing.
That was the
That's
golden
incredible.
age of our space program. And it's really a shame that since that time, both sides of the aisle have been guilty of not treating NASA, our space program, as being in our national best interests.
Yeah.
Instead, they've shifted NASA funding into discretionary funding. And we've had a couple presidents, and I'm not going to pick on, I try to avoid politics, but we've had some presidents who have failed miserably in understanding the importance of the space program and the technological advances that we glean from it.
Yeah. No, it's I've been finding it fascinating, the number of rockets we've been sending up lately since it privatized to SpaceX.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to really explain where the heck they are all going.
No, they don't.
Which also raises a lot of questions, right? What's transpired over the years if we've been doing reverse engineering? Most of my friends that are engineers that have worked at NASA and various aspects of the military-industrial complex, whether it's Harris or Northrop Grumman or Boeing, et cetera, have all told me that whatever we have available right now, and these are guys that are working on the super secret squirrel projects, whatever we have available now is way behind what they actually are working with or what they actually have. So it makes you wonder, so what exactly is going on? What's actually occurring? The fact that they've changed some of the Air Force bases over to Space Force bases, but yet we've dismantled NASA and we have no shuttle fleet. So what are you Space Forcing if we're not, if we're actually not in space aside from the space station, right?
The
And satellites.
military does have its own version of a space shuttle, which is classified. And they say that they, meaning the military, has said that, well, it's unmanned or unpersoned.
Right.
But the dismantling of the shuttle fleet was one of the stupidest decisions that the White House has ever made. And it was George Bush who signed the contract or signed the order ending the shuttle program. And the Constellation program was supposed to follow it up. But then Barack Obama said, well, we don't need a space program, and canceled Constellation and cut a deal with Vladimir Putin to have the Russians bring American astronauts into space to go to the space station. Now, I said I wasn't going to get political, but what's wrong with that picture? And to me, that was a failure on both sides of the aisle. Bush should have already signed the Constellation project, so that it was a huge booster rocket that was going to replace the space shuttle. But my friends that are in NASA, a lot of them have said that the space shuttles were still good for several more flights, maybe dozens of more flights. And I think instead of phasing it out, they should have simply upgraded, redesigned, and put out a newer version of it. But then again, nobody asked me.
Well, the truth of the matter, though, is I've talked to people involved in the projects, and they're telling me that, quite frankly, they've got stuff that's more advanced. I mean, I had a guy who's a good friend of mine who we have an annual party that he attends, and my MO is usually to ply some of these guys with a few more drinks than they normally would, and then start asking questions to see what they'll. I'm not really trying to get them to divulge national secrets, but I'm trying to get them to give me some little tidbit of what the heck is going on. And one of them divulged to me. He said, "Yeah, we've got more advanced stuff." And I go, "Well, what's more advanced? Do we have ships?" And he was like, "Yeah, we've got some ships." And I said, "Well, it's not possible. How are we not seeing them?" And his words to me were, "Who said you could see them?" And I went, "Come on, man. Are we talking Star Trek? Klingon cloaking devices? Like what? where are you going with this?" And he just literally was like, "I've said too much." Like he shut down on me. He was like, "Look, all I can tell you is," he said, "just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And anything you've got right now that's out on the market, whether it's your iPhone or whatever the latest tech is you see that's being distributed through consumer goods, is way behind whatever we're actually working on." None of those guys ever divulged to me what you were talking about in that House Oversight Accountability Subcommittee last July 27th, when they spoke in front of the House. The three guys. It was Ryan Graves, who's the executive director of Americans for Safe Aerospace, retired Air Force General Major David Grush, and Navy Commander David Fravor, who all testified that we've had a multi-decade reverse engineering program of recovered extraterrestrial craft, and that we, in addition to it, recovered non-human biologics all the way back to Roswell. That was all. That's all now completely public information. Which you and I were laughing before the episode. Why aren't people running in the streets screaming? This just kind of flew over everybody just went, "Oh yeah, okay, fine, we're."
I don't get that.
It's amazing
either.
to me.
I mean, non-human biologics. Let's see it. Let's see the evidence. What have they learned about it? What have we what have we developed from it? Now, let's back up a bit. Today's July 2nd, which is World UFO Day.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1947, about 75 miles north of Roswell, a rancher, Mac Bazell, and that's in New Mexico, Mac Bazell found the crash site of a strange object and the accompanying debris field, and had this very unusual shiny metal. And he took some of it to the local sheriff, who then took it to the U.S., the Roswell Army Airfield. Back then, the Air Force was not yet a separate division. It was still the U.S. Army Air Force. And then the Roswell, I believe the Roswell Daily Record, the local newspaper, issues a story that the Army had recovered a crashed flying saucer. So boom, this hits world news. Then the Pentagon steps in and says, "Oh no, it was a weather balloon." And now, let's fast forward 12 years into the late 50s, and there was this young engineer who had just acquired a top secret security clearance. And he was with this, the vice president in a tech company, and they were visiting a laboratory in Southern California. And they're in the lab, and they saw silicon chips being grown.
Right.
And he's like, "Silicon chips, where'd we get the idea from this?" And the VP said, "Well, this is the greatest advancement forward in electronics since the invention of the light bulb." And at the time, for amplification, transistors were being used, and transistors were considered a big deal. But now we're looking at silicon chips. And so this engineer says to the vice president, he goes, "Where in the world did we get this idea?" And the VP said, "Well, that's just it. It didn't come from this world." And he said, "Something happened in New Mexico a few years back, and it gave us ideas. And the government brought in all the tech companies. And the name of that engineer, his name was Earl, but I knew him as Dad." So my dad was
So he told you this story.
He told me this. He said, "Mark, they found something at Roswell that didn't come from this planet." Yeah. And he said, "Because we went from transistors to silicon chips."
Yeah. Yeah. And that explains, I mean, look, there's that was some of my questions I've had for some of my buddies that are in these more advanced projects is, how are you guys quantum jumping technology so much, right? You look at something like the iPhone that we have today, and then you look at where we were before the iPhone, and then the iPhone suddenly comes out, and you just go, what happened here? How did we jump so much so fast? And the only explanation is reverse engineering of other tech. It's almost like a missing link in evolution, right? It makes total sense that sudden jumps in technology are not being invented, especially when you can't take what was already in existence, like you said, go from a transistor to a silicon chip, and you mentioned the word growing them,
Growing
right?
them,
Growing
yeah.
them, yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
Growing them,
so when
it's
you
like,
start to going down that road, you just kind of go, wait a minute. So if
yeah,
that's what
and
happened with the silicon chip,
a
what else
yeah,
have they done?
it takes a month to
Yeah,
grow a silicon chip and then flatten it. And so you had this extremely tiny piece of silicon so expertly engineered that can do functions that far exceed anything. I mean, at that time, people were using cathode ray tubes
yeah.
and all these, very what by our standards very
Just
primitive. And you
souped up
think
light
about it,
bulbs. Yeah,
yeah, but that really wasn't in terms of human history. That wasn't that long ago.
right,
In
right.
1947 to now 2024, and the technology we have is simply astounding. Unfortunately, the intellect of humanity, particularly our leaders, hasn't
Right.
improved with that. And I know I get crashing on it a lot, but as a psychic medium, as a historian,
Right.
as a student of archaeology and philosophy and theology, um, our weapons technology is so incredibly sophisticated and destructive.
Yeah.
And you have people like Kim Jong Un and the Iranian fanatical religious theocracy and Vladimir Putin with their fingers on the buttons of
Yeah.
these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that doesn't say much for humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. So I want to ask you in a second here, because I know you've traveled around the world. You've seen things from Egypt, et cetera, from all over the planet. Uh, so clearly you've seen firsthand some of the things. I'm always reminded by a lot of people that I listen to or read a lot of their reports that have been written, books that have been written, et cetera, that they drew what they saw, right?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me how much, for lack of a better way of putting it, technology shows up in what we consider to be ancient cultures. And it's in whether it's carvings on the wall, whether it's statues, whether it's, art, etc., shows up. And it wasn't until recently, maybe in the last 15, 20 years, that anybody really started paying attention, saying, you know what? That is all technology that we have today. How could they have known to even create it, even from an artistic standpoint, right? Where would the idea come from? And everybody always says the same thing. They drew or they carved or created what they saw. So then the question becomes, how long has this been going on?
Engineers still can't figure out how the pyramids in Egypt were constructed.
Right, right.
Another interesting thing about Egypt, okay, so the pyramids, as far as Western archaeology says, they're constructed 46 centuries ago. So that's 4,600 years ago. And then Egyptian history is so incredibly lengthy. 1,500 years after that was about 12 to 1,300 years after that, after the pyramids, was what's called the New Kingdom. And that's like
Right.
King Tut, okay? King
Right,
Tut.
right.
All right. So at that time, during the New Kingdom, which was still 33 centuries ago, the pharaohs were being buried not in gigantic pyramids. And there's a lot of people who say that the pyramids are not tombs, but power production facilities, what have you.
Right.
But the tombs that the pharaohs were buried in the Valley of the Kings, most of them have these incredibly ornate paintings on the walls and the ceilings. They're exquisite works of art.
Right.
And they're way underground. Where's the soot marks from torches on the ceilings?
Yeah.
How were these underground? And it wasn't just like, 10 feet underground. We're talking stairways that went deep into the ground, hallways that went 20, 30, 40, in some cases even longer. Like the tomb of Seti the first is 400 feet long underground. And there's no soot marks
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
ceilings. How did
Well, and
they
I've seen
illuminate
engineers
that
do
to do
drawings
this?
of if slaves truly did haul those stones into place, they were doing the math, right? Like from a technology standpoint of what they believe existed, which would have been rudimentary pulleys, lever systems, etc. They were doing the math on how many slaves and what distance you'd have to be from from the pyramid to actually move these stones into place. And even that's still theoretical. They can prove the math out, but when they look at the logistics, it makes absolutely no sense. They didn't even have rope that would be strong enough to carry that weight, that distance with that much torque and get them into place. Nothing actually ever comes to a conclusion. Everything just stays kind of in the theoretical span of things. And now recently I've been noticing that because the government there has allowed different things to occur over the years, whether it be ultrasound, radar use, things like that, only for very limited areas of the pyramids or for limited periods of time, they've been able to discover. And then also looking at the way they're designed, they're not tombs, right? That was this whole idea that they were built to be a tomb now is starting to go away.
Oh, there's other
In addition to
schools
their
of thought on
positioning
it.
with
Yeah.
the stars as well, and the nodes that they sit on the planet as well, the energy nodes. So there's all this stuff coming up that they may have actually been the source of free energy back then, which then would explain, to your point, they wouldn't be using fire. They wouldn't be using the things that we think they'd be using to do this type of work, create the pyramids, cut the blocks, move them into place, etc. There would
Yeah.
actually be far greater advanced technology even than we have today.
And that's why a lot of people think that there could have been an alien influence with that. And I'm
Right.
not saying that I necessarily subscribe to that theory, but that's one of the theories. I think that's fascinating. In my work as a psychic medium, and what I do, and Chip, I've done
That's why I
readings
wanted
for
to ask you
you
about
and your
that. Yeah.
wife, and yeah, I've what I do is I facilitate communication between people here in this world and their loved ones in spirit. And I've been very honored to do readings on a number of people who claim to have been abducted by UFOs. And I've done readings on two of the most high profile people. One woman's name is Nancy Tremaine, the other one's
Yep.
Calvin Parker. And I want to talk about Calvin. Calvin Parker in October of 1973. He was 19 years old in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And I interviewed Calvin and I got to know him. I used to call him on the phone and we'd talk. And he was as Mississippi as it gets, all right? And he and his friend Charles Hickson, 42-year-old guy, they knew each other through work. They were fishing. And all of a sudden, this metallic object came out of the sky. And they wanted to run. And Calvin said, we couldn't run because this light hit us and we couldn't move. And then these three robotic creatures, things, emerged from the metallic device. He says it looked like it was about 100 foot long, shaped like a football, and it was silver, like aluminum silver.
Yeah.
And these robots took them on board. They were separated. Charles was taken one place, Calvin another. And he said they put him on this table and they started injecting him with all types of things. He said this device came out of the ceiling and made these clicking sounds. And he said he couldn't run, he couldn't move because they injected him with something that felt like a sedative.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting, he's the commander. It was a woman. He said it was the most. And the way Calvin talked, Mark, that was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life.
Right.
So, but the weird thing about her is her two middle fingers look like some type of lizard hands.
Oh, that's weird.
Okay.
They were longer than the rest of the hand.
They were longer than the rest of her fingers, and they looked like something from a reptile. And he said, and when she spoke to these robot things, she made this croaking sound. It goes, sound like a frog or a bull alligator. Okay. And he goes, I said, she was pretty. He goes, man, if I was at a bar, I would have talked to her. But he's also said, well, when he was supposed to be, he was engaged to be married. His wedding was going to be in 2 weeks. Well, then the robotic things, when they were done, dumped them off where they were right where they were abducted. Yeah. And they first said, we're not telling anyone about this. Well, then, of course, they went to the sheriff's department. And there was a medical exam, and all over their bodies were little puncture marks.
Wow.
Okay. And over 5 decades, Calvin was subjected to sodium pentothal, truth serum, hypnosis, lie detector, polygraph tests, interrogation on all levels of law enforcement, and always came back with no deception. Same thing with Charles Hickson.
Yeah.
And he told me, he goes, Mark, you don't get rich telling people you've been abducted by aliens 2 weeks before you get married. He goes, it's done nothing but cause me trouble.
Yeah.
And then he confided to me, and I believe he said this to other people as well. 20 years later, they came back from him, and he was by himself. He's in his truck. He goes, there it was again, that metallic object and those robotic things. He said, but this time when they brought him on board and he saw that female, he shoved her as hard as he could. He goes, I was mad. I go, and he said, when I pushed her, all of a sudden, the beautiful woman, he said it was like some type of hologram, and there was this reptile-like creature underneath it, and then it reformed.
Yeah. Right.
And he said, now I know why they did that. They made sure that there would be this beautiful woman, someone I'd be physically attracted to, so I wouldn't be afraid.
So be calm,
I said, well, what happened when you shoved her? He goes, those robotic things came off the wall and roughed me up, held me down. And not long after that, he developed cancer.
Oh, my God.
And he died almost 50 years to the day after the abduction. Now, what's interesting is Nancy Tremaine said a very similar story. She was a little girl, and she was abducted in Michigan in front of the police. The whole neighborhood, this metallic object came out, hit her with this light, took her. And she said the most handsome man, because they came for her a number of times over her life, most handsome man she's ever seen. Same type of thing, though, that croaking sound. And according to the UFOologists and people in the U.S. military, including Colonel Dr. John Alexander, who was head of the UFO, U.S. Army's UFO project, there's more than one species coming to Earth. I've heard as many as 5 or 6 different.
I actually heard there's more than that.
Yeah, there probably is. And there's the grays. So the reason I'm telling you all this, I was honored and privileged to do a reading for Calvin. I've also did a reading for Nancy Tremaine for this. But one of the most riveting ones, I was doing a gallery event. And that's where there's about 100 people there. And Chip, you've seen me do that, where I'm drawn to certain people.
Yeah.
And this was in Arizona. No, excuse me. I stand corrected. It was in Colorado. It was just outside of Denver. And there was this young man there that I was drawn to. He was probably 19, maybe 20 years old. And he was like the perfect male specimen, rippling with muscle. He kind of looked like Tom Cruise did in the first Top Gun. He had those Tom Cruise chiseling, his crystal blue eyes. I mean, this was like, real good looking young man. And his grandfather's spirit came through and started. And he said he's talking about the grays and how the grays come to get you. Well, this kid started freaking out, trembling, shaking. Tears came out of his eyes. He goes, they come for me. I want them to stop. And the grays are one of the other alien species. There's the reptilians, the grays. There's a whole number of them. And what they told, his spirits told me, is that they targeted him because of the way he metabolizes protein.
Interesting.
And that he needed to change his diet and his health habits to make him less interesting to them. So I'm like, okay,
that's weird.
And I've been practicing medium for years.
I was just gonna say, you were probably like, wow, this is a new one.
Yeah, it was totally a new one. Well, when I did the readings for both Nancy Tremaine and Calvin Parker, their spirits reference protein as well. So then I met Chris DiPerno. Chris DiPerno used to be a high-ranking police investigator in the state of New York. And he said he never believed in UFOs until he had to debrief a number of people who had called the police and claimed they had been abducted by UFOs.
Right.
And he's like, and then they started the evidence they were getting. Long story short, Chris now is the head of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network in the state of New York. And I was talking to him about Calvin, about this young man, and I mentioned they said that they target, the spirits told the abductees that they were targeted by the aliens because of the way they metabolize protein. And Chris said,
Right.
"What did you say?" He goes, "Oh my God." He said, "Mark, every abductee craves protein like we've never seen after the event." He goes, "One guy,
Interesting.
he actually ripped open he was craving protein, and they were getting him some hot dogs. He ripped open the package of raw hot dogs and wolfed it down in front of them, and they're like, ew." And he said that the protein craving never stops. So I called Calvin Parker and I said, "Well, do you crave protein?" He goes, "Mark, I can't get enough of the stuff. Bacon, sausage, steak." I mean, and all of them crave protein. So Chris and I were wondering, what is it about protein metabolization
Yeah.
that makes these targeted individuals so interesting?
Yeah. It's weird. Like I said, all of this stuff just keeps constantly circling. And I know in your book, The Afterlife Frequency, you talk about obviously collective consciousness and all of that. Clearly, we as humans, it's starting to become more and more apparent
Yes.
that where we came from, Homo sapiens sapien, right, which is the current modern human, may not necessarily have evolved the way we were taught, in grade school. I've talked about
Yes.
this before that, Charles Darwin, that when he wrote the theory of evolution, in the end of the book, when you actually look at the unedited version, the one that's not shown in public schools, he actually states that this is a theory because he couldn't bridge the gap between the apes and Homo sapiens sapien. And that because
Right.
of that, he fully anticipated in his lifetime, before he passed away, that it would be refuted. His theory would be refuted. And it would be some other way that we evolved would have come to light. And I can't figure out whether science as a community just got lazy and went, well, you know what? This sounds good. We're just going to call it the missing link. It bridges the gap. We can tie a lot of things together, and that just kind of, explains everything. Or was it purposely suppressed because somewhere along the lines, we did become aware, as again, talking about what was divulged last summer, that somewhere in human history, modern human history, and certainly since Darwin's time, that we discuss, that we became aware of where Homo sapiens sapien came from, meaning genetic alteration, etc., from
Well, let,
another civilization that's not from here.
let's get back to, why are they looking for specific protein metabolization
Exactly.
markers? So when they're taking samples, they, meaning the aliens that are abducting human beings, are taking samples. Clearly, they're taking DNA, genetic material. Why?
Right.
Is this for some type of human alien hybridization program? Now, I know this sounds very X-Files. Remember that old show, The X-Files? And they got
trust me,
into
I'm aware of this episode. I'm going to get a lot of rolling eyes. I get that, but
well, then, and that's
the science is there. Is what we're trying to get to. Yeah.
But there are people who believe that aliens are already here, but they've been genetically altered to look like us. Gee, I wonder where they got the material to do that. Are they creating another species? Or,
right.
For example, when you watch, let's say, a Discovery Channel or Animal Planet special, and you see a polar bear, and biologists will shoot it with a tranquilizer, and it falls down, and you go and start taking samples. When I was watching a program like that, and I was thinking, this sounds like what Calvin went through, except they're doing it with a bear.
Exactly.
Now, maybe they're studying us as, oh, these are intelligent ape-like creatures, or maybe there's a more sophisticated purpose that what they're doing. And I think there's
a design plan. I think there's a design plan around it. I don't think it's just study.
This sounds, but then again, within the last year and a half, we've had F-18 pilots. Okay, these are Top Gun guys, and they are the most serious and credible people probably on the planet, and they're talking about UFOs, things that are doing rings around the most sophisticated U.S. military aircraft, and they're saying we don't have anything like this.
Right.
So clearly something, or more than one something, is coming to visit this planet. And I find this fascinating and intriguing. And I asked Calvin, I go, well, why do you think they're coming here? And I remember he said, Lord knows, Mark. He said, we're on a collision course for disaster, maybe they're going to intervene. To which that could be good, or I've seen Independence Day. Speaking of World UFO Day, we got 4th of July in 2 days.
That's right.
But the point is, something's coming here. Too many people have witnessed UFOs, very credible people.
Well, that's when you talk globally too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Globally,
that's the other weird
this
thing.
isn't an
How
American
do you have people
thing.
globally all see and experience the same thing? It doesn't make any sense. They're not. And this is pre-internet, by the way. I mean, pre-internet and the World Wide Web, people were still reporting the same things. That's so either one of two things are happening. Either they're all experiencing the same thing, or back to your point, which we know there's a collective energy, there's a collective consciousness on the planet or the universe. Are we just all experiencing the same thing? And that's how, are people seeing, is it a perception thing? Is it the Schrodinger's cat? What exactly is happening?
In the Afterlife Frequency, I explain about spirit communication. I refer to our world as the material world, and I analogize it to AM radio.
Right.
Okay, because it's all energy, vibration. Yep. And then the other side is FM radio, which is higher frequency modulation and faster vibration. So you have two energetic systems, but both, everything in the universe from the subatomic level on up vibrates at different levels and frequencies. And so spirit communication is when the afterlife frequency changes its vibration so that there can be communication with our, an alignment with our vibration. In other words, they quantum leap from that dimension to this dimension. It appears, based on what I've talked to with Dr. Alexander and other people that study UFOs, the scientists, a UFO is not a tin can flying through space for thousands of years.
Right.
According to Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, nothing can go faster than the speed of light.
Right.
The closest star to us is Alpha Centauri, and that's 4 light years away, which would mean at the speed of light, which is 186,282 miles per second.
Right.
You'd have to travel that speed for 4 years to get there. We don't have that technology. In fact, Voyager has traveled, I think, like a light minute, distance wise.
And how long has it been out there?
Yeah, since the 70s, 40 years. Know, right? So it has been theorized, and a Mexican physicist whose last name was Alcubierre developed the Alcubierre metric. And what he said was, okay, so this is space. Here's Alpha Centauri. Here's planet Earth. And if you're able to generate an energy field, a warp bubble, you're not going to exceed the speed of light. What you're going to do is bend space-time so that you jump from one coordinate to the next through a warp in space-time. Now, we know from Star Trek warp speed and all that, but that's all based on theoretical physics.
Right.
And the general consensus in the astrophysics community is that this is possible, but humans we've not yet developed the technology. So you're not violating Einstein's theory of relativity. What you're doing is creating a fold in space-time so you can jump from one coordinate to the next. So instead of having to go at light speed for, 4 years or 1,000 years, it's instantaneous with this type of technology. Well, it gets even better because scientists say that the warp bubble has to be projected externally to the object. So does that mean they have some giant device in space that creates this warp bubble to propel these things? The question is, how do we get them back? Or are they propelling other such things in orbit or whatever? And I know that this is mind-boggling to hear these things, but this is all based on sound scientific theory. I mean, think about it. This may sound outlandish, but go back to the year 1902 and explain a microwave oven to somebody.
Right.
Oh, there's a little box. You open it, put in a cup of water, press a button, and the water bubbles. Or you can freeze or melt something that's frozen, or cook something by pressing a button, and the inside of the box, when you open it up, isn't hot. Only the food is.
Like what? Well, like an
What? Yeah,
iPhone. I mean, an iPhone is an example. If you were in Salem, Massachusetts, back in the day, you'd be a witch if you
you'd
showed
be
up
a
with an
witch.
iPhone, right? Look at this
Yeah.
piece of glass I have that shows images of humans in what? Huh? How's this even working? I still don't know exactly how an iPhone. I've talked to people. I've talked to some top physicists. I'm like, please explain to me this in layman's terms. How I'm watching a movie on my iPhone. I get Wi-Fi. I get, but how is it so quick, so seamless, so perfect? It should be glitching and like phasing in and out like an old radio. None of this makes any sense, and they have trouble explaining it. So you just kind of go, where did the tech come from? If some of the top scientists can't actually explain to me in layman's terms exactly what's occurring.
The question is this technology reversed engineering, or did extraterrestrials give it to humans?
I think you're talking one and the same, right? If they gave it to us, the powers that be are going to call it reverse engineered regardless because of the
I,
just the ego aspects.
I've always felt, though, that intelligent beings, though, to be observing Earth, would realize that humans are an extremely violent and destructive species, and that whatever technology they would voluntarily give us, we would
Yeah,
weaponize.
right.
So if one of their craft crashes, which shows that they're not gods and they're not perfect
Correct.
and they're,
Correct.
they're fallible beings,
Yeah.
and I guess they make a wrong turn somewhere and boom, like they did in Roswell, and there's another place in the UK was supposedly where there was a UFO crash. My understanding in
Yeah.
Siberia as well, and probably other places. And so when the U.S. Military recovered the Roswell wreckage, and they brought in all the tech companies,
Right.
they would find usable technology. I mean, a U.S. drone crashed in Iran a few years ago, and the Iranians captured it and probably reverse engineered. Now we
Yeah.
see, their puppet, the Houthi regime,
Yeah.
attacking ships in the Red Sea using knockoff technology they got from us. I mean, the Chinese have been
Well, they've been
stealing our
selling drones to other
technology
countries too.
for
I think
years.
even Russia
Yeah,
has been purchasing drones from
yeah,
Iran that was all reverse engineered technology from us.
yes,
Along those same lines, my in another life, I've worked in the medical device industry, and one of the technologies that's used in one of the products that I was involved in uses a metal called nitinol. When you actually research where nitinol came from, nitinol was introduced to the public sector. It was given to the public sector by the U.S. Navy. It was a declassified tech back in around 1982. Now, the interesting part about this is everything described when you look at modern nitinol today, all of its characteristics match up exactly with some of the people that you spoke about that were the first on site at the Roswell crash. I think one of them was a police chief. He
yeah.
brought scraps back to his family, and what he described is nitinol. And so that's a tech that was held on to in secret all the way up until the early 80s. And then it was released at no charge, by the way. They sell it for like $1 and the first thing they developed was an inferior vena cava filter because nitinol's properties are it can't be bent, it maintains its original shape, you can't
Wow.
crumple it, and it expands with heat. You can actually take an IVC filter and blow on it with hot air on your mouth, and it'll open like a flower petal. And it maintains equal circumference all the way around. That was the first place they used the tech. Now nitinol is used all over the place. And it doesn't exist on the planet. That's the other thing. It's an alloy that they have no evidence as to where it came from,
I
aside from the
love
fact
it.
the U.S. Navy released it to the public sector, and the elements that are in it cannot be found in nature. It's a very it's a very strange tech, and it's again another one of those things where it gets released. You can find all the information that the Navy intelligence released it to the public sector. Medical companies just go on and start using it, and it's used in other industrial projects and things like that, and nobody ever goes, wait a minute, where did this come? Oh, you don't need to know where it came from. Just take the tech, go play with it and use it. But it literally and more than likely is the metal, the original metal that was recovered from that crash site, which then a couple days later they tried to tried to show us plastic,
A weather balloon, yeah,
weather
with the
balloon
kind of
material, and claimed
aluminum
that was
looking,
it. Yeah, it was all crumpled up and
yeah, mylar or something.
Mylar stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, it was a
But this
weather
is
balloon.
happening all the time. So, Mark, now you've talked with people. You're communicating when you do your gallery sessions, your one-on-ones, things like that. I know you've worked really hard on some other technology that may allow us to be able to communicate at some point with the other side. I know you've been kind of involved with some of that. But just from a standpoint of the afterlife frequency and what you have in the book, you talk about being able to tune in like a radio station. So in other words,
Right.
so my question to you then is, as it relates to not only where your expertise is in the field, but also as we're talking about UAPs and UFOs, there's been talk about that being some of that may actually be interdimensional
Correct.
that's showing up. So
Yes.
that plays into what you're referring to, right? The afterlife frequency, is that dimensional also?
Yes.
Okay.
That's why when I was talking about the Alcubierre metric,
Yeah.
where you jump from one coordinate in space to another,
Right.
or even if it's from another dimension.
Right.
So what we're seeing is in spirit communication, also in paranormal investigations, where we're able to detect the presence of spirits and sometimes non-human spiritual intelligence, and also with UFOs, we have different entities using a similar energetic modality
Mm-hmm.
to jump from one dimension to the next.
Right.
And I believe that as our science progresses, we're going to be able to understand this much better. And particularly in the space program, it is very possible that within our lifetimes they will be able to generate a warp bubble, a warp field to do that jump from one coordinate to the next. Of course, that would imply that the funding's going to be there and so on and so forth. But the one of the positive aspects of privatization of space is you've got a couple different companies now that are able to put their money into it and don't have to deal with so much with the budget strings and the congressional oversight. I mean, and some of the intellectual level of some of the members of Congress. I mean, they have no business, being in office, much less
Right.
playing with a coloring book.
Right.
So they simply can't make these decisions.
Right.
And I know a lot of people crash on Elon Musk and all that, and I don't want to get into his politics or anything, but the man is brilliant, and he certainly, and he's an extremely high functioning genius with Asperger's syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
for sure.
that enables him to think in multidimensional ways.
Interesting.
I mean, people that work with Albert Einstein, they say that you'd be talking to him, all of a sudden he would drift off and then come back with this great idea. So where was he going?
Who's he talking to?
What was he doing? And I understand that Elon Musk is very much the same way, and there's other geniuses along those lines as well.
So,
I mean, look at someone like Leonardo da Vinci. 500 years before the helicopter, he was drawing sketches of a helicopter.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, when you're looking at the physics, I mean, even right now, Harvard has come forward and said, yeah, we now have proven and we know that there are multiple, we're talking in the millions, dimensions happening simultaneously in this reality, right? So now they're going from, and they've stopped talking about three-dimensional reality and started talking about density, right? Because of the frequency. Yeah. So now instead of third density, which is where we've all been living, that the planet and other aspects of it are moving into a fifth density frequency, which is in turn then crisscrossing and or lowering aspects of different dimensions. When you're communicating, and obviously you talk more about the science behind it in the afterlife frequency, but when you're communicating effectively, and obviously this has been happening since you were very young, you're a fourth generation psychic. Is someone like you, whether it be genetics or whatever started the connection, allowing you to communicate, meaning that from a frequency standpoint, they're using you almost like when there's been paranormal activity, when they've been able to use a piece of technology, right, like a radio or something like that, to communicate with this third density or this dimension that we're in. Are they basically using you the same way, meaning they're tuning in the frequency and you become like a transceiver to some extent for
Yes.
that dimension?
Well, think of a reading as a triangle, and the afterlife frequencies at the top.
Right.
I'm at, or the mediums at this one side, and the person that is the reading is on the other. So it's a three-way energy flow.
Got it.
And I'm the conduit. So yes, in a sense, they're using me.
Right.
But I turn it on and turn it off. I have that ability to, I'm doing this or I'm not doing, because people, I'll be somewhere and like they'll run up to me and say, is there spirits around me? And it's like, look, I'm here to, buy apples, It's like, I'm not here to, and
come on, Mark, just turn it on. Yeah,
turn it on, Can you sometimes it does, but that's why those shows where people run into a pizza parlor, hi, I'm a medium, it's like, well, I've been on TV a lot, and so
I know.
8 different close-ups, perfect makeup, perfect lighting.
When you were younger, was it harder to control that? Were you getting more connections coming through because you hadn't really developed the ability to turn it on and off?
Yeah, that's a sign of an undisciplined medium. They come to me all the time. I get younger mediums coming to me and saying that. And it's like, well, why would you want that?
Right.
Do you leave the doors and windows of your house open and unlocked and unguarded?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that some, negative entity is going to jump in, but it also denigrates the quality of the contact, as opposed to saying, I'm doing this versus I'm not doing this.
Right.
And when you maintain that quality control, and the spirits will work with you, they're very easy to work with, and very and they like talking to us. They like communicating with their loved ones. And I found, like, when doing the readings on the abductees, their loved ones in spirit were very much concerned with the negative impact that the abductions were having on them. I remember I did this one reading, and I said, it's as if time stopped. And I said, the liquid beings, the people that look like they're an outline of people, but liquid. And he started going, oh my God, the star people. And I said, it feels like they're able to stop time. And I don't know if they're able to stop time, but he said, that's what it felt like. Like he was caught in this, how did he describe it? It was like he was between this world and the other world during the abduction.
Wow.
He said it was like time itself even stopped. And what's fascinating is a number of abductees, they talk about there'll be 2 or 3 hours of their life that they can't account for. This seems to be very prevalent, particularly in the repeat abductions. And once again, if they're targeting specific people for genetic markers related to protein metabolization, and they're conducting some type of experiment or observation, of course they're going to go back and get the same subject. The way, like when scientists go out and they'll tag a shark or tag a bear or something and track that particular animal, they appear to be observing and coming back, but they also appear, some of these species have the ability to induce a form of amnesia. So there's a number of people who say they've lost a couple hours, and when they came back, they said they knew they'd been abducted. They could just tell.
Interesting.
Yeah, I it's very, very fascinating stuff.
And you've never had that experience yourself. I know you've had an near-death experience.
Really,
I know you've had an NDE, but have you ever had anything like that?
Yeah,
yourself.
I was driving back from college to my parents' house, and I was on 520, State Road 520, in leaving the Orlando area, and then the next thing I knew, I was on A1A turning off on the exit to go to my parents' house, and there was an hour and a half. I have no conscious memory of that. And I've always wondered, like, what was going on. And, yes, I was in college, but I wasn't drinking or smoking or doing anything. Right. I mean, I was just driving home. And there's an hour and a half of my life that I have no record of.
Wow.
And I
And you
remember I
really have
told
no
it to,
recollection of what
I
happened.
have no recollection, and
It's bizarre.
I've been blessed with the number of gifts, and I thank God every day. And one of them is my memory. I
Yeah.
mean, I can remember being in a high chair at about 11 or 12 months, and
Yeah.
the first things my parents were saying to me. So I
Wow.
remember things all the way up to that. But there's an hour and a half. And I remember I told Nancy Tremaine that. She goes, I think you need to do some hypnotherapy and find out
Some
about
regression.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, regression.
Yeah.
Go to that.
I
Now, I'm
I
not
actually
saying I was abducted. It could have been a lot of things. Who knows?
I actually, so when I was about 5 years old, I grew up in the New York metropolitan area. The beach that we used to have to go to was a place called Jones Beach. And for anybody that's watching or listening that's aware of that, it's about a 13-mile long beach. Literally from the water to the parking lots is about a mile wide. These are large beaches that are the main beach that everybody in the New York metropolitan Connecticut area go to frequent during the summertime. My family, we used to go out there on a regular basis. We get out there this one morning, apparently early. I've got my sister, my older sister was with us. All my siblings are much older than me. I'm a happy accident in my family. I'm the youngest of five. Everybody's like 20 years older than me. So two of my brothers were there, my mom, and they're waiting outside of what would be like a gift shop where they sell like snacks and things like that. And the restroom is inside there too. So my dad had taken me in he used to coat me up with Sea and Ski. There's an old brand that no longer exists. I think it was like the first suntan lotion that ever exists. But he used to take my bathing suit off. I'm 4 or 5 years old, coat me head to toe, like just and leave it like thick, like just like I'm covered in cold cream, and let it just sink into my skin. And he put the stuff on me, took me back out, and apparently he was at the glass counter looking at something in the gift case or whatever, and was holding my hand. Well, when he let go of my hand to talk to the lady that was waiting on him, when he turned back around to grab my hand again, I'm gone. Now the doors on this shop, big heavy doors, a lot of people coming and going. My dad spends about 5 minutes looking all around this shop, looks in the bathroom, can't find me, comes out front. My whole family was literally sitting outside the door. They're like, no, he hasn't come. He's 4, like 4.5. We haven't seen anybody. So immediately they now start looking for me. To shorten the story, they get with the lifeguards, they get with the state police. They've got an all points bulletin out for me. As the day goes on, they have helicopters searching for me. They get the National Guard involved because now 6-7 hours have gone by, and one of my brothers is in an Army Jeep, one of the old school, Willys Jeeps, and they're weaving in and out of the blankets from the boardwalk to the waterfront, going up and down this 13 miles of beach. My dad's out walking on foot. And so at the end of the day, they had reconvened, and they had decided that when the beach closes at sundown, right? So right as the sun's going to go down, they're going to link arms with every National Guard, state police, and lifeguard that mile from the water all the way up through the parking lots. And they're going to walk the 13 miles of beach, just touching and covering everything to see where I may be. At this point, they're looking for a body. They don't actually know. Long story short, my dad is down at the very end beach. It's several miles from where I disappeared. And off in the distance, as the sun's going down, he sees this little tiny silhouette. And he starts getting closer to me. And as he gets closer, he recognizes the red, white, and blue stripes on this little bathing suit I had on. And he starts sprinting. When he gets to me, I've got my hands behind my back, and I'm watching some construction equipment move earth. So they're doing like landfill type work. And my dad runs up in a full sweat behind me. And he said, when I turn around, it's like he's been there all day. And I just calmly say, hey, Daddy, look, Digger Man. Now he picks me up, carries me back. I pass out. Of course, my mom has a heart attack because she sees me coming from a distance with my dad with this limp body in his arms. So now they all think I'm dead, but I'm just passed out cold. I had no sunburn. I was missing my shoes. I had no T-shirt on.
And nobody knows how you got that far away, like
Mark, 7-8 hours gone. Wow. No one saw me. Oddly, my whole life, the story's been told over and over and over again. No one's ever said, where the hell were you? And I have no memory of it. And it wasn't until just recently. I know we have a mutual friend, Sherry, who owns one of the shops. And so Sherry's an intuitive, intuitive. And so I had gone actually to meet with Sherry because, like you, Mark, I was like, I started, as I'm learning about all this stuff in the last 10 years, I'm starting to hear other stories that are similar. And I'm like, was I abducted? Like, all of a sudden it hit me like, was I abducted? Well, oddly enough, when I went and talked with Sherry, she connected and said, no, you weren't abducted. It was some other dimensional beings needed to talk to you. They needed to
Cool.
remind you of something. And yeah, that's where you went. They basically were like, hey, come with us for a little while. And so I've been kind of left with that. And like you, I haven't done a regression. There's a part of me that really wants to go back and figure out what the heck happened, because nobody in my family, nobody can explain it. The National Guard, everybody was perplexed. Like, where is he? But he's not dehydrated. I wasn't hungry. I just was missing my t-shirt and the little Ked sneakers I had on.
Wow.
Were gone. That was it. But not harmed. They did a full physical.
Wow.
Just disappeared literally for 8 hours on a random. And I think it was around July too, by the way.
One of the few stories of a child that disappears with a happy ending. So
yeah,
thank
no
God for
kidding.
that.
And they never even thought about that. Like, they didn't like close off the highway looking for a van that said free candy and kittens or something on the side of it. Like they didn't do that back then. So no. Yeah, it's weird. That's my only lost time.
Oh, that's
so to speak. I've had some other experiences that I think I want to talk to you about when I have you back to talk about NDEs, because you've been on here 3 times. I don't think we've still gotten to that part because there's just a lot to talk about.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave.
That is a
everybody.
Good place.
And since it's World UFO Day, everybody, if you want to find out more about me and my weekly show, The Psychic in the Dock, every Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and about my books, please visit afterlifefrequency.com. And because it's World UFO Day, I'm going to say, everybody, live long and prosper.
I think that's where we're going to end it. Thank you, Mark, obviously, for another episode of BluRock. Always a pleasure. And like I said, we're going to have you back. I definitely want to talk to you more about NDEs. Happy World UFO Day to everyone listening and watching the episode. And as always, find peace, lead with love, and live aloha. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mark.